Our first presenter is Suzie Mitchell, Country Managing Director of DHL Philippines. Suzie oversees one of the largest logistics operations in Philippines and previously ran regional operations for DHL. Once again, let us all welcome Suzie Mitchell.
Hi, good morning. Morning, excellent. Pleasure to meet a lot of you today. And as Richard mentioned, the two of us met a couple of months back, and I normally do presentations on logistics and on business. And he asked me quite shortly after the last presentation, would I speak at this summit? And I instantly said yes. And then I started panicking because I was like, what am I going to talk about? I've never spoken about myself or women. And I had some advice, and the advice was, why don't you do some reading? Why don't you read a little bit about sort of women and what's happening in this feminist movement? And I thought, I've never done this. And I did. I picked up a couple of books, and I looked at some stuff that I thought was quite interesting. One of them is bias. So when we think about bias, well, first of all, what is bias? So bias is an inclination or an outlook to present or hold a partial perspective. It's limiting our views on our lives. What's interesting about these biases is they're learned biases. We learn them as we grow up, as we develop. And I think in the context of women and work, there's a lot of information out there about these external biases. A lot of the biases, some examples of biases are the fact that women need to be friendly in the environment. They need to be strong and powerful, but they also need to be friendly. Men don't need to be friendly. That's an external bias, and there's a lot of work on this. There's also, though, something I found more interesting when I was reading, and that's our internal biases. What decisions do we make about ourselves that we've learned through the culture that we grew up in? And I found this quite interesting because I started reflecting on myself and my story. And so I'm going to focus on my biases and how they shaped me. So I go back to this picture. This is where I grew up. I grew up in Australia on a cattle farm. This is actually a photo of our land in Australia. Where this photo is taken actually is on a road outside the house where my mother grew up as a child. Up in the top corner there, you can see some trees. That's where my father grew up. So all good presentations have a road and a journey. But my journey, when I was born, when I was first growing up, was quite short. My world was quite narrow. My parents never finished high school. They went to high school, they never finished high school. I grew up in a small town of a little over 1,000 people in this town. The men were farmers, and the women stayed at home. So, what sort of happened in my world that made me who I am today? So that's me. I mean, I'm in school. I'm happy. But my world, and to explain sort of how small my world was, we had meat and vegetables every day. And a lot of people said, I would love to eat, roast meat every day. But we never experienced anything else. I'd never eaten pizza before I left home at 18. I'd never had pasta. As a child, I'd never even eaten spaghetti bolognese. I didn't even know what it was. That's how small my life was. To go to school each day at high school, I used to travel almost 90 kilometers each way to and from school. So here I was, I'm quite successful at school. I want to get into university, but everything around me is saying, hey, that's not what you're supposed to do. And so I had this bias, this whole culture around me was saying this is what I should be doing, and I wanted to do something else. And I was actually running calculations, not in my head. As a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, there was no Excel spreadsheet and computers, but on pieces of paper and a calculator, I was trying to work out, is it worthwhile going to university? And I was doing something like this, actually on paper. If I didn't go to university, yeah, it doesn't do me justice, but I had this upbringing in my life. So if I didn't go to university, if I just worked, in Australia there's a minimum wage, which is quite high. There's also a cost of university. So for not working for 5 years, And then the university fees, the total cost of university, and I put it in today's dollars, but I was doing it back then in their dollars, about $230,000. An entry-level salary for an engineer is about $67,000, so the difference you make is about $30,000 a year. So it's going to take me about 7 years to break even on my degree. This is what I was thinking. Now, I wasn't doing it correctly because, of course, your entry-level salary increases. But as a 17-year-old, I didn't know this. And to break even at 30, that didn't make sense to me. Because by 30, my mother had 4 children. I always thought by 30, I would be married and I would have children. I wouldn't be working anymore. But I did want to go to university. And why I'm sharing this story is I thought this is what I had to overcome. What I read in the literature, that apparently many women throughout their career are actually making decisions about not taking a step up, not taking a promotion, not because of their current situation, but because of their future situation, because they might get married, they might want children, they don't want to take on a job that's too challenging now because of their future situation. And this literature is saying we should be encouraging women, take the challenge now. Sure, if you're pregnant and you've got a child, it might not be the best time to take a promotion right then, but don't start limiting yourself too early. And I found this quite inspirational message to share. So to progress and to show you sort of how I turned out, I did go to university. I did mechanical engineering. I was the only female in the course. I learned a lot in those 4 or 5 years of engineering, how to be a female around men all the time. And I also learned to experience what it was like to be the only female in this environment. Everybody knew my name. The dean knew my name. The lecturers knew my name. If people were talking at the back of the class, no one got in trouble except for me, because they knew me. Okay? If I didn't show up, everybody knew I didn't show up. Okay? And this is kind of what happens, a reflection of what happens in the workforce. If there are less females working, there's more attention on them. And more attention sometimes is not good because there's more pressure. But I kind of learned to deal with this very early on, and this helped me. I was lucky in this sense that I almost kind of became liberated from this feeling of I needed to have children and get married early, because I made the decision to go to university, and one of the best universities in Australia for engineering, and then I kind of learnt what it was like to be around men. And I thought, oh, okay, I can do this now. I've already done the hard stuff. So what did I go and do after that? I did lots of stuff. First of all, I went to university in Melbourne. I took an engineering consultancy job in Brisbane, so I moved from Melbourne to Brisbane. They rang me up and said, do you want the job? And I said yes. And my very first time I was on an aeroplane in my whole life, I was 24, and I was moving to a city where I knew no one. And I went to Brisbane, and I worked at Brisbane as a management trainee as an engineer, and then I moved to New Zealand. And they said, would you like to move to New Zealand? And I said, yes, sure, I'll move to New Zealand. So I went and I moved to Wellington. And I was enjoying moving, and I was enjoying the challenge, but I realized I wasn't actually enjoying being an engineer, because I was designing pipes and ducts and motors. And I didn't do 5 years of engineering to design pipes my whole life. So I thought, right, I want to do more still. So I quit my job, and I moved back to Melbourne. Now, in Melbourne, I had no support. In Melbourne, when I did engineering, not only was I the only female, I was one of very few people that lived away from home, that had to work and support myself all through summer and while working and while studying as an engineer. So I quit my job. I didn't have much money, and I moved back to Melbourne, and I refused to take a job as an engineer. So I got a job as an admin assistant for a trading company, a chemical trading company. And I went back to university, and I got my master's degree in international business. And my parents were beside themselves. What are you doing? Why aren't you getting married? But I was like, I don't want to yet. I want to grow and develop. And so then, after working for this company, I got picked up by Caterpillar. Caterpillar in Australia is a very large organization because Australia has a lot of mining. And so the green color represents another company I work for. So I worked for Caterpillar in Melbourne, And I did projects, and I became a Six Sigma black belt, and they sent me over to America a lot to get certified and trained as a Six Sigma black belt. And then they said, well, Suzie, would you be interested in moving to Shanghai? And I said, yes, I would love to move to Shanghai, but I'd never been before. I didn't know what Shanghai was about. But 10 years ago, or a bit more than 10 years ago, I moved to Shanghai, and I took a job with Caterpillar in China. China was great. It opened up my eyes to the world. But it was also difficult because 10 years ago, there wasn't many single females working in Shanghai, and I did not have many friends. There was lots of men working, and there was lots of females that were trailing spouses. There wasn't many people like me, so for a while I was lonely. I had to kind of deal with being lonely because that's what you get for going out and doing exciting things. There's pros and cons. But then I also met amazing women. I met 3 other great friends who were kind of like me, different, but they were also inspiring. And I had a great time learning their stories and being inspired by them and being in this city that was growing and developing. And so then Caterpillar had this career path for me. And the next stage for Caterpillar was to go and live in Midwest America in their headquarters. I'm like, but I don't want to go and live in a country town again. I came from a country town. I want to stay and live in a city. So I quit my job at Caterpillar, and I moved to Singapore, and I got a job at Microsoft. Now, when I took the job at Microsoft, I had never been to Singapore either. I had never met my boss, and I just did a phone interview. And they're like, we want somebody like you, and we've got this big project to be run in Japan, and we want to hire somebody like you to run the project. And I said, sure, I'll do it. And that's what I went and did. And I had a great time. But then when the project was finished, I looked around Microsoft, and I thought, this is a software company. I work in logistics now. This is not the company that's good for me in my long term. So I went and I found another job that was good for me. So I stayed in Singapore and I interviewed with the CEO of DHL. At the time, he was just coming into the organization or coming back to the organization. He didn't actually work. We met for coffee. And he's like, Suzie, you've got an interesting background. You could probably work in my team somewhere. Do you want to do project management? That's what you do. And I said, no, I want to break from that. I want to do something else. It's like, do you want to do process improvement? You're a Six Sigma black belt. You've done quality. You can do this. And I was like, no, I kind of want to do something else. I don't know, though, what I want to do. And he was building a new team. And he's like, well, how about you just come and work for us? I think we can find somewhere if you want to give it a go. And I said, yes, I'll do that. So I moved across and I worked for DHL. On my first day of work, I didn't have a boss, I didn't have a title, I didn't even have a desk. And on the first day, I had 2 bosses because they're trying to work out where I should work. And it was kind of fun because I thought, well, I'm out there and I'm having a go and I'm enjoying my life. And isn't this what life is about? So then I worked in different things, and where I ended up in Singapore was I became the vice president for automotive engineering and manufacturing. It was mainly a sales role that I hadn't done before. But I looked around me and I looked how other people were doing the sales role, and as an engineer I was good working in the automotive sector because I had that training, and I was quite successful in that role, and I enjoyed it, and I did that role for 5 years. At a certain point, I'm like, well, I want to do something else again. I want to do something else. So I went to one of my ex-bosses, but he had been my boss before, and I said, hey, I want to be a country manager. And he's like, have you ever managed anybody? And I was like, no, I've never managed a team. He's like, have you ever managed a P&L, a business? I said, no, I haven't done that either, but I think I would be good, and these are my qualities. And within 2 months of that conversation, he offered me the position of country managing director in the Philippines. So one of the things I learned when I was reading about this is that I think I'm lucky because I overcome some of my internal biases. I overcome some of my challenges very early on. What I realize is, in reading, is that some women don't overcome these early on. They kind of stay with them a lot longer. And that we should be encouraging each other, you know, to just go out and have a go, to take on that challenge. And I think that's a good message to send. But this is kind of only half my story, because this is my professional story. Sorry, this is not working. This is my husband. My husband is a Korean. Now, remember when I grew up, I'd never even met an Asian, never seen an Asian in my life. My husband is a Korean, and a real Korean. We spent last weekend in Seoul with his family, right, eating Korean food. Right? This talks about diversity, and it shares that if you are able to open your mind, if you are able to travel, and if you are able to experience new things, you can grow and you can develop, and you can become more whole, and that's what we want sort of everybody to be. So if I move forward a little bit, what I told before about my journey wasn't my only journey. I did a little trip across, and I worked in Chennai. I worked in Chennai because I followed my husband when he had a job in Chennai, but I kept the color yellow because I stayed with DHL. I talked my boss into letting me keep my regional role and be based in India. I wasn't there for that long because a global crisis happened and we came back. But it's an important story to tell because a lot of stories out there about powerful women is that they must be the most powerful person and their husbands must follow them. But a marriage is about respecting, and a marriage is working it out between you. My husband has a PhD in engineering and an MBA from Chicago Business School, and we value both of our careers and each other's careers, and we value what we bring to each other. There are no winners and losers, but sometimes you need to compromise, and it's a nice story to share. I often get asked, is my husband here in the Philippines? And the answer is yes. What he did at a certain point in time, he was earning more than me, he's 6 years older, but at a certain point in time, he got a little frustrated with corporate life, and he said, I want to go and start up my own business. And I said, well, that's great, because I want to stay in corporate world. But it meant then that I became responsible for the family, for the current income while he starts up his business. And I took on this role because it's actually what I wanted to do. And he took up the role of starting his own business from scratch. His business is based in Singapore. He travels to China, he travels to Thailand, but he's in the Philippines with us, and he's using this opportunity of my job to develop his business in the Philippines. So we found something that works for both of us, and we are very lucky, but we also worked it out. And that's a nice message. So is it just the two of us? No, we have kids. We have two nice kids. This photo was taken about 6 months ago, so it's fairly recent. The baby turned 1 on Friday, which is why we're up in Seoul. And again, it's more balancing and working out, but it's got to be a good relationship, and I would encourage everybody. I know it's not the norm in the Philippines, but try and stay with your spouses and try and stay together and compromise. You don't have to be strong woman, but you do have to also sort of work out what you want to do and try and overcome your own biases. So, am I perfect? I share the story of how I've overcome this female bias and I've overcome the, race bias, and I sound well-rounded, but I'm not, right? I still have my own biases. So I wanted to share this story of what happened 2 Sundays ago. Now, like most people in the room probably, we have helpers at home and we have yayas, and they help us. I think of them as my enabler. I could not go to work every day if we didn't have them. We have a extra helper because one of our helpers is away, and just really quickly with the story, the lid to the pink salt went missing. We lost it. The helper threw out the lid. Now, my husband goes shopping. He loves shopping. He goes to S&R, and it's very manly because he goes and buys lots of stuff, and he's a provider for the family. And the lid to the pink salt went missing, and my husband sighed like, and I'm like, you are criticizing, in my mind, thankfully not to him, but in my mind I'm like, you are criticizing the fact that I work, because you're criticizing the helpers, and the helpers are my enablers. And what's happening is my old biases do keep coming back. And that's why we've always got to be aware of this. And we've got to think about how sometimes we overreact, make the wrong decisions, we make judgments on other people because of something that really isn't fair and really isn't neutral. And I still do it. And everybody does it. It's part of us, but we need to overcome these. So how do we change these biases? Last year, I went and I taught a mathematics class here in the Philippines. It was an elementary school, an underprivileged elementary school. And I did not do a very good job of teaching them mathematics. I know that. But I stood up in front of a class and I showed the class that females can be successful and they can work in an industry that is mathematics. And this is being the role model for change. We're not going to change the whole world, but we can influence. And that's what I would like to do, is just influence. What else happened that particular week is my son got a note back from school saying he wasn't able to separate the responsibilities in our house. He wasn't saying that mum cooks and dad fixes. And that's because we don't separate responsibilities. We share responsibilities. And that's a nice message. And you can see a little arrow up there, because I said to the teachers, hey, be careful what we're teaching our children. You know, my son last year, his best friend was Sabrina, a girl. He came home from school about 8 months ago and declared that he was a boy. And after then, he only started playing with boys. And I'm like, this is kind of wrong, and we've just got to be careful of the messages we're sending, because they do impact us later in life. So just in wrapping up, a little about me and DHL, where I work at the moment. In DHL, there's 3 divisions. One of them is the supply chain group, which is where I work. There are 22 country managers, and I am the only female. So you go, wow, that's not very good ratios. And it's correct, it's not. But we're not going to fix everything all at once. What is happening that I'm extremely proud about is DHL is doing diversity training. And diversity training isn't just about females, it's about race diversity or biases. It's about discrimination on age, discrimination on sexual orientation, discrimination on the color of your skin. And we're not just sitting people in a classroom and training them. We're actually having roundtable discussions about how our biases might be impacting other people, how our biases might be making the wrong decisions, and how we can be more open group. And I think that's wonderful. I really think what DHL is doing as an organization, not just for women, but for all diversity, is a very good message. I'm very proud of that. And then, just to leave on a high, last week at work, we were looking at setting up a new team. We have a new customer. And one of the sector leads, who happens to be a female, she was talking amongst this small group, and she said, I want this person. She identified a lady. I want this person to be the contract manager. And I thought it was a very good suggestion. But as I was walking to the car park with her afterwards, the person she suggested lives in Cebu. And I don't think they've ever met. And I said, have you ever met this lady that you recommended? Why would you recommend somebody you don't know? And she said, I recommend her because I heard she's a strong leader. And I think that's absolutely amazing, that within our culture and within work, we are recognizing women as strong leaders, and they're getting a very fair opportunity. And that's my good news story. So thank you very, very much for your time today.